We can't have Christmas without Santa and his elf. Welcome back to another Christmas tutorial. This is Stephanie from Little Cookie Co. Okay, so what we're going to need is our edible marker, a sharp pair of scissors to cut our tipless bags, and of course a scribe tool. Here I've got my icing all bagged up and ready to go with the colors that I want to use. If you need a good icing recipe, I'll link my icing recipe below in the description. And we have our two cookies that we're going to be using, our Santa and our elf. So we're going to go ahead and start with our Santa cookie. So the first thing we're going to do with Santa is we're going to outline his face. So here I'm just going to make a sort of pointy oval shape from one side to the other with my outline consistency. That's my thicker icing, and this will hold in my flood and keep the shape here. I just touch down at the point that I want to start. I lift my bag up a little bit with a little bit of pressure and pull. I pull it to the other side and I touch down where I want to end. Now I'm going to go in with my flood, and I'm trying to flood as close to the line. I'm not putting my tip on the line, I'm putting it right beside. And when you put pressure on your bag, the icing sort of bubbles out. And so I line up the side of how much my icing is coming out. I line it up to as close to the outline as I can. This comes with practice. And if I'm piping right on my outline, it's going to flood right over. So what I do is sort of look how much of the bubble of icing is coming out of my bag, and I push it. I use my bag and the pressure to push that icing towards the outline. Here I'm just hovering my scribe and pushing the icing towards the outline where it didn't cover. You don't want to scrape your cookie with this scribe. You just want to hover it over. So I put this aside to dry for to crust over. Depending on what you have, if you have a fan that's drying it or a dehydrator, maybe takes 20 minutes or so. If it's air drying, it will take a little bit longer, maybe an hour or more, depending how humid your area is. So once it's crusted over, which means the top is just dry enough that it's not wet anymore or liquidy, we can go on to our next section. So I've outlined the beard. I'm just going to do the outside of the cookie. I don't need to outline the bottom of his face. And while that outline dries, I'm going to go ahead and do the top of his hat. So with my red outline, again, I'm going to touch down and I slowly go around the cookie. And you can see I'm taking my time. I always pipe outlines with two hands. I always have my left finger against my hand or the bag just to steady my hand. Piping outlines or specific patterns with one hand is very difficult, so it steadies your hand if you have it with a finger or something to stabilize it. Here, I'm going to scrape off the outline because I don't like the way it fell. A little bit too far away from the edge. It's hard to see in the video, but I'm just going to take my scribe. I scraped it off, and then I'm going to re-outline it. And again, just touch down if I need to fix anything, some little points sticking up or attach the outlines together. I can use my scribe and it'll fix it up. So now while the red outline dries, I'm going to go back to my white, which is dry now, and I'm going to flood. Again, you can see I'm not exactly on the outline. I'm flooding just beside it. The tip of my bag is next to my outline. And you can see that the tip versus what's coming out of the bag is a lot thicker. The icing coming out of the bag, sort of has a radius. So I tried to line that up with the edge. So again, you can see here, the tip is not right on the bottom of his face. It's in the middle or a little bit away from, where the icing is falling. And I use the pressure of the icing coming out to push that icing up against his face. And these little corners like here, I let go of the pressure of my bag because I don't want to overfill that area. It's a small corner, so you go in. Now in the middle I can go a little bit faster because I can put more pressure and be a little bit more careless with everything on the outline is okay, so we can just fill it in. And here with my scribe, again, I'm just hovering over and I'm sort of pulling the icing up, and sometimes you have to go past the outline for the icing to catch on. And I'm going to hover my icing in that hover my scribe in the icing here, and I'm just pushing the icing towards the bottom of his face to fill that seam, you know, make it nice and smooth and not have little gaps where the icing is maybe further down, further up. Again, here I'm starting with my outline, taking my time. You notice that I started a little bit away from my outline. I usually tend to do that because sometimes when I'm starting in a corner there that has, you know, 3 different colors now, I want to see how much icing is going to come out of my bag. And sometimes you have a bubble that comes out when you first start, and I don't want that bubble in that corner where I have his face and I have the beard there. They all connect there, so I don't want a bubble of red icing to fall on top there. So when I start icing, I start a little bit inward of my cookie, and then I go towards the edge so I can have a feel of the icing and how fast it's going to come out of my bag. So once I've outlined everything, I'm going to go in with my scribe and smooth it out. And again, push that icing up to his face. Make sure that, you know, the seams are nice, everything is smooth. And then I'm going to put this aside to let it crust over. So you can see it doesn't look wet anymore. The top and the bottom and the face, they're all crusted over and dry, and we can move on to our details on top of the face. I'm just going to outline it with my outline consistency, and here just give it a rough outline. And then I'm going to go in and fill it, and this is my flood icing, and I'm going to fill it right away and not wait for the outline to dry. Usually I wait for it to dry. The reason when I don't wait for it to dry is because I want to be flexible. My freehand isn't the best, and so if I don't let it dry, I can move my scribe, you know, I can move the icing with my scribe where I want it to go. So if, you know, it came out a little bit wonky or not as thick as I wanted to, or the tip wasn't, you know, as pointy as I wanted the mustache to look, I can fix it with my scribe. Whereas if the outline is dry, I don't have that flexibility to fix that if I make a mistake with my outline. So I'm just going to outline the little ball you saw there and let it dry. And now we're going to go back to the hat, and I'm going to outline the top sort of section of his hat, or the bottom section, I guess, the top of his face, white. And here I'm going to go really slow and try to get right in the seam between, so I don't see any red where my white will be. Here I put a squiggle of outline icing, and the reason I do the outline is it's a small section and it's prone to cratering, which means the icing falls in on itself and sometimes creates a hole. When it dries, it might look fine when it's wet, and then all of a sudden, you know, you wake up the next day and there's a big hole in your little ball there, and that's because it craters. So that little squiggle of thicker icing helps to support it so that it doesn't cave in on itself. And here again, I'm using the squiggle, and this is used on more narrow parts that are more prone to cratering. You know, bigger areas usually it doesn't happen. It happens in smaller areas or thinner areas. And then I flood right away. I just flood on top, and then this will help us have a nice puffy icing look. And you can notice that I put the white part on top of the hat instead of, you know, flooding a white section right above his face and then flooding the red on top of the white part. I'm putting it on top of the red that we already iced, just to give a little bit of a more 3D look. Here I've cut my bag in an upside down V, and we're going to do a little bit of holly. If you need to know how to do this, I do have a video on flowers that I'll link below, and it shows you how to do how to cut your tipless bags to make a leaf. It basically is just cut your bag in an upside down V. And I'm going to put one red dot for the holly, and I'm going to let it sit like this and dry. I don't want to put the other dots right now because I don't want them to melt together. So we're going to let this dry, and then we can add our next dots. So now that the right side of the mustache is dry, I can do the left side. Again, I let it dry on purpose and did other things because I don't want them to melt together. I want the sections to look separate. So for that to happen, we have to let those sections dry or crust over. And again, I did my outline, and then I'm going to fill it with my flood, and I'm going to move it around with my scribe. If it's a little bit smaller than the right side, it's not, you know, high enough or low enough, I can fix it with my scribe because I didn't let my outline dry. Okay, Okay, so I'm going to go back now to the holly. Thicker icing takes way less time to dry, so I just needed a few minutes for it to hold its shape, and I can put a couple more dots in there, and I know that they'll stay separate. Okay, now is when the edible marker is going to come in. Now this part, you want to make sure that your icing is dry enough that if you're going to draw on your cookie, that your marker will not poke through. This is a very fine pointed pen, and so it's very easy for it to poke through the icing. So I make sure that the skin area, this face area, is dry enough that I won't make a hole. And I gently, if it's not dry, just make sure you go very gently, don't put any pressure when you're marking it. These are the easiest eyes to do. I love doing these because eyes are sometimes very difficult to do. They look funny if you don't do them right. So this is perfect, nice smiley eyes. Here I just added a nose on top. My mustache is dry enough that if I put the nose, it'll hold its shape. And I'm using my thick icing just to put a ball there and smooth it out with my scribe. And we're gonna add some eyebrows to him. And this is my outline consistency. Again, when there's small areas, I like to use outline. It holds its shape, but it's able to be smoothed out with my scribe because it's such a small area. So I just put a little bit of pressure on the bag and I sort of build the icing up, and then I'll go back if I need a little bit more icing, and then I can go ahead and smooth it out with my scribe. It's much easier than, if you have to outline this area, it's way too small. Don't even attempt it. Just go for it with your thicker icing. And this is pretty much our Santa. So we're gonna put him off to the side to fully dry now. And again, if you're drying your cookies, you wanna pack them up in a box or something, you wanna make sure you leave them on the counter. Out in the open, do not cover them. If you cover them, it won't dry. Leave them on the counter and leave them overnight. Then they'll be fully dry the next day, and you can package them up or put them in a container or a box, whatever it may be. Okay, now that we've finished Santa, we're gonna move on to the elf. So here again, I'm gonna start with his face. I've touched down, lift my bag up when I have bigger areas to outline. When I have small areas like the sides here where his ears are, there's a lot of curves and turns where I can't quite lift my bag up. So then I keep my piping bag as close to the cookie as possible, but without touching it. And when I have bigger sections like the bottom of his face or the top of his face, that's when I can lift my piping bag up and get a smooth line. But anytime you have a lot of turns or curves, it's much easier to get those when your piping bag is close to your cookie. That way you have more control to move your line in the smaller space. So I'm going to go ahead and outline his eyes in his face, and they're just basically upside down U's, and we're going to close them off at the bottom. And before I let it dry, I'm going to fill it in right away with my flood consistency. The reason I'm going to fill it in right away is because I want the face and the eyes to be sort of one flat level. I don't want the eyes to be separate. I don't want a seam or a dip between the eyes and the face. I want it a smooth surface. So the outline I put there just to hold the shape, to make sure that the flood didn't go all weird looking and misshapen. And then I'm going to flood the outside of the face, and right away I'm going to go flood around the eyes. And the reason being is while the outline is still a little bit wet and the flood is wet, I want it to come together with the rest of his face, the flood from his face. You can see when we're doing Santa, we did a section, we waited for it to dry, and it gives us that seam, it gives us that separation. Here, we don't want that separation, so once I do, one color and then I right away do the other color, they'll kind of melt together and will not give us a seam. I did do the outline because I did want to keep the shape. Sometimes your flood will not keep the shape if you do it that way, or when you go to flood his face, it might pull your flood out. So that's why I did the outline first. I'm going to go ahead and outline the top of his hat. And again, I'm not happy with where my line fell here, so I'm just going to scrape the whole thing off. When I do these videos, sometimes the angle that I am working on my cookie is a little bit weird for me. I normally like to pipe right on top of my cookie, but because the camera needs to see the cookie so you guys can see it well, I try to keep my head out of it. So sometimes I can't see the edge of my cookie very well. Just another side note as well, when you're doing cookies like this, and if you want to turn the cookie, if it's easier for you to flip the cookie upside down or sideways to pipe something, please go ahead and do it. Do whatever works easiest for you. It doesn't always have to be, the way you see other people do it. If something works better and makes your life easier, then please do it. So we're just going to finish up outlining the rest of his little green sweater or shirt, I guess. And once, we're done this, we'll let that dry and we'll go back up to his hat, which the outline has now dried. And I'm going to go in with my flood. Again, you see I start away from the outline, and reason being, there's a little corner in there and I don't want my flood to bubble out all of a sudden onto his face. So I start with my flood a little bit inward to see how it falls and get that bubble, off the tip of my bag, and then I go towards the edge. And again, you can see the tip isn't right on his top of his face. It's just a little bit above it, and I'm letting the icing do the work of going into, close to his face and filling in that area. And I'm going to go in with my scribe and smooth it out, make sure that all the icing is pushed towards the edge, and then all the icing is nice and close to his face. I'm not too worried about the seam because we will be covering it up with some white icing to make the white part of the hat. Okay, so now we're going to go back down to his shirt, and you can see I'm doing those squiggly lines again. These are smaller sections. Even though we outlined a big section, the individual points make smaller areas, and that's prone to cratering. So these little squiggly lines, they're my outline consistency, and it's going to help us, prevent those craters from happening. And then I'm just going to go over them and flood. I do that right away. I don't wait for it to dry. I've let my green crust over now. It's dry enough for me to do a little detail here, and I've got some yellow icing that's nice and thick, and I'm just holding my piping bag in one spot and putting pressure on it, and it's leaving a drop of icing. So they're kind of just little bells or little, fancy details there on the bottom just to make it more interesting. And you can see I'm going in with my scribe after every dot, because sometimes it leaves a little peak when you pull your icing bag away. So I just want to shake it a little and jiggle it so that the peak goes away. Okay, so now back to the hat. The red has crusted over enough. It's not wet anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and pipe the outline here of the top, the bottom of his hat it would be, at the top of his face. And once I finish outlining that, I'm going to go and outline his little ball to his hat. And so again, I do one section and then I'll go to another to make, not waste my time sitting there doing nothing, waiting for that outline to dry. I might as well do another outline and then go back and forth. So instead of doing a squiggly line, because this area is so narrow, I can't really get a squiggle in there, I'm just putting a line of icing, just a rough line in there. And again, that's to help the cratering. And then I'm going to fill it in with my flood. I'm putting enough pressure just to fill everything at once. It makes it easier. Okay, moving on to the eyes. I'm going to grab my edible marker. I have a fine tip marker here, and I'm going to outline the outside of the eyes first. You can see that I'm taking my time. I'm going slow. I really want to follow the line of the white part of the eye. And once I'm done, I'm going to, on the corner of the eye, I'm going to put his pupil. So I'm just going to draw a line here so I know where to stop and then fill it in, just color it in. And do the same direction for both eyes. And I'm not pushing super hard. If your icing is not fully dry, you don't want to push really hard through your icing because you will poke right through it. And then once I'm done the black part, I can go and grab another color. So here I've grabbed a blue that I have. It's always good to have like a set of edible markers in a few different colors. They come in handy when you need to do the mouths or the eyes. And so here I'm going to use the blue, and I'm just going to do a thicker line above where I did the pupil, and that will create our eyeball shape basically. And you can see now he has a little bit more character to his face. Now we're going to go and grab our outline consistency and make him a little nose. So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure on in the same spot, just enough to make a tiny little button nose there. And I'm going to go in with my scribe and get rid of that little peak. And then I'm going to grab my edible marker again, and we're going to add a mouth onto him. You can see his face is really coming to life now and looks a lot better than he did a few minutes ago. Okay, so I have some brown icing. I forgot to put this icing in the beginning of the video here, but again, you can make a redhead, brown, black hair, blonde, whatever you'd like. I had some brown icing left over, so I'm going to use this, and this is my outline consistency. You can see it's thicker here because again, it's a small area. I want it to hold its shape. If I use my flood, I might not get those defined strands of hair or the points that I'm looking for. And so I'm putting a little bit of pressure and building up the icing a bit, and then just running along the hat. You can really do whatever you'd like here. I like to always have a little bit of hair come down beside the ear, just to give a separation that that's the ear and that's the hairline. And then it adds a little bit of depth to the face as well. I'm going to smooth it out as much as I can with my scrub. It is thicker icing, so you have to work a little bit fast before it starts to dry. Thick icing always dries much faster than flood. And so I'm going to do my best to just wiggle it free. But if there's a little bit of texture, I don't mind. It's hair. It doesn't have to be perfect here. And now I'm just going to add a few finishing details. I'm going to add a few eyelashes onto him. And then we're going to just put a couple lines in the ear, just to get, again, a little bit more detail, a little more definition. You have your little elf, Santa's little helper, and you have Santa Claus. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And I have a lot of other Christmas tutorials if you want to check out a little bit more, I guess you could say advanced. I have some easier tutorials as well, but if you've gone through all of them and you're getting a little bit comfortable with decorating cookies now, these are great ones to try out. I will link the cutters below in the description so you know where I got them from. And happy baking. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.